This FedGov Today program is sponsored by NDIA, the National Defense Industrial Association. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, getting back to the point in the revolutionary FAR overhaul.
The goal from 1984 was to have a single, uniform, government-wide method for acquiring goods and services. We've lost that bubble early on, and I'd like to recapture that.
Procurement law expert Alan Schwatkin on FedGov Today in just a moment. You can join Defense Innovators this week, Wednesday through Friday, August 27th through 29th in Washington, D.C. for the NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference. Features a great lineup of top government leaders, classified briefings, and a new Global Defense Hackathon. I'll be there Friday morning to moderate a discussion. You can see the current lineup and register at ndiatechexpo.org. That's ndiatechexpo.org. Fixing a listing problem is one of the most recent achievements of the revolutionary FAR overhaul. The FAR Council announced a new set of updates to the FAR last week. Alan Schwatkin's a partner at Center Law Group. Alan, welcome. You and I were just talking before we turned the recorders on that you and I have been at this for a very, very long time, including discussing the original development of the System for Award Management database. What's happening with the SAM database now that's important in your view? Welcome, Alan.
Francis, thanks, and it's great to be back with you. And we have been at this for 2 centuries, so may the continuity be with us. So, over time, the U.S. government has relied on a database for tracking contractors and critical information about those contractors. It's now called the System for Award Management. It's managed by GSA with the input from Department of Treasury and other agencies as well. All contractors who want to be awarded a contract have to be registered in that System for Award Management. We call it the SAM database. And since 2018, the Federal Acquisition Regulation has had a requirement that contractors who are interested in competing for and winning business have to be registered in that database continuously from the time they submit their offer all the way through the time that they're awarded a contract. A continuous registration view. Well, not surprisingly, the contractor community has found a way to weaponize that requirement and found many instances when contractors' registration in the SAM database had lapsed in that period between submission of their offer and award. Sometimes it was a day or two, sometimes it was a few weeks, but because of that regulatory requirement for continuous registration, they said the protester alleged the vendor was ineligible for award. Well, that really was the requirement for continuous registration seemed a little bit harsh. And even the federal agency said, well, we want to make the award. We've evaluated the qualifications and capabilities of these companies. So this procedural issue about registration, no impact on me. To its credit, a few agencies stepped out early on and created a deviation from this government-wide requirement for their own purposes. And in November of 2024, the FAR Council made a change to that continuous requirement and said, in the pre-award phase, all you need to do is be registered at the point in time when you submit your offer and at the point in time when you're awarded the contract. We don't care what happens in between. Great result for the government. It took away a lot of little, checking and monitoring. Good result for the contractor because it avoided minor slip-ups, administrative errors on the contractor's part. Last week, the FAR Council finalized that interim rule that they published in November of 2024, made no change to it, and so now we have a permanent view, a permanent requirement of that be registered at only those 2 points in time. And my advice to companies all the time is be continuously registered, because the decision of when to make an award is solely in the government's control. And you don't want that gap. You don't want to miss the opportunity, even though there's no ongoing requirement in the pre-award phase for continuous evaluation. That's what the FAR did. I wrote a blog about it for Center Law on the Center Law website, and complimented both the FAR Council and the government for finally getting it right.
We're going to put a link to that blog post on the show page at fedgovtoday.com so folks can find it pretty easily, Alan. What does a vendor need to do to stay continuously registered? Is there a set it and forget it, or is this something that a company will have to come back to on a periodic basis?
Registration requires an annual renewal. There are certifications and representations that a company needs to make, such as its ongoing size status, whether it's selling any Chinese telecommunications equipment, and a handful of other certifications that it has to make. So there are changes that are made to the SAM database. There have been some recent upgrades to the government database to make it a little bit more a little easier for companies to follow. The older versions were kind of clunky, and you had to click through lots of steps. It's not hard. It's time consuming because there are a lot of questions involved. But more importantly, it still requires validation by the government after you finish. So it's contractor goes all the way through the steps to initial registration or renewal annually. And there's still some lag time where the government validates the data, particularly your taxpayer identification and other information, before you are, quote unquote, registered or active in the system.
Another item that we talked about before we turned the recorder on, in addition to the fact that we've been doing this for a long time and we've known each other longer than some of our friends have been alive, is that there is a lot going on with the FAR overhaul, and there are a lot of things happening I think folks were thinking might never happen as far as changes to the FAR. What's your overall takeaway with that effort at GSA in partnership with OFPP and the FAR Council about updating the FAR and what they've done so far?
I've been both a supporter of it and a critic. And not surprisingly. The support side comes from when the FAR was first written in 1984, and I wasn't in the room when it happened, but I was nearby, was in the next room over. The goal there was to have a single uniform government-wide set of standards by which the buyers, the U.S. government, and the sellers, the contractor community, could know the rules of engagement. Almost immediately, agencies started deviations from that single book. And over time, as Congress has passed laws affecting some or all or one of the agencies, court cases have come into play. The FAR has gotten a little unwieldy. Now, for experts, others, whether I'm in that category or not, you were in that category or not, we've lived with it, we've grown up with it, we know how to work it. But if you're new to the marketplace, it's a challenge and it can be daunting. And lots of companies choose not to do business with the government because they don't want to go through and read a couple hundred or a couple thousand pages. So I welcome the need for an update and some cleanup of it. What I don't like is that it is proceeding in piecemeal. So President on April 15th directed the FAR Council, which is comprised of OFPP, the Department of Defense, NASA, and the General Services Administration, to rewrite the FAR, eliminate things that are not statutory or are not essential for effective acquisition for goods and services for the federal government. And so they've been proceeding almost part by part of the federal acquisition regulation. There are 50 parts in the FAR. Part 1 is the overall description. I'm not going to go through all 50. Part 2 is definitions.
Thank you.
All the way to part 52 is clauses. Now, I said 50 because the two parts don't have any content. They've already done 22 of those, but some of them are major reviews, some of them are minor. Still to come are some big pieces. President directed them to finish this work by October. And so without any published schedule available to the public, they're proceeding apace. Already finished revisions to 22 parts of the FAR. And again, I think there are some good changes that have been made, some clarifications, eliminating things that are out of date or no longer relevant, but they've also eliminated some things that are very valuable to both the buyer, the government side. It gives them some guidance and some direction on how they can best approach the marketplace for the purchase of goods and services, as well as valuable for the seller, so the contractors know what the basic rules are.
What's some of the stuff that's gone that you would like to see either not have been taken out in the first place or put back in some form, Alan?
The one that comes immediately to mind, Part 10 deals with the information to be provided to companies in how the agencies go about market research. And they've stripped that down considerably. They've taken out a lot of references to outreach to small business. They've taken out a lot of references to techniques that government buyers can use to evaluate market research. And in one of the publications, FAR Part 12 on commercial items, again, they've streamlined some of the market research tools available to the government officials to use by cross-referencing to other provisions which may or may not end up still being in existence later on. So those are two examples of things that have been taken out where I think true, they're not statutory. Do they directly contribute to efficiency in the purchasing process? No, but I do think they contribute significantly to helping the government understand who's got capability in the marketplace and how the government can best access that capability.
You mentioned the fact that the FAR as originally constituted evolved a lot over time, and I wonder, are there things that you would like to see the FAR Council do after this iteration is completed or mostly completed to prevent that creep from happening, that we have to come back to this process at some future point and say, okay, it's grown again and we've got to cut it back again somehow?
I think the FAR Council needs to be a little bit more aggressive at monitoring deviations to the FAR by the individual agencies. Look, this is a big government, even with all of the shrinkage that's taken place in the last couple of months. What the government buys is somewhat unique by agency needs. And so there has to be flexibility for addressing that. But I think the FAR itself is a flexible document to give agencies the room to acquire what it needs, when it needs it, and to pay a fair and reasonable price for those goods and services. We've created way too many deviations in the agency supplements, not only with the Department of Defense because of its unique world, but all the way through many of the federal agencies. And I think a more careful monitoring of that deviation process would be helpful and beneficial. Because, again, the goal from 1984 was to have a single, uniform, government-wide method for acquiring goods and services, even though we're going to have different services from research and development and architect and engineering and construction. We've lost that bubble early on, and I'd like to recapture that.
Alan, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for catching up with me today, and thanks for sharing your work with us as always.
It's my pleasure, Francis. Great to see you.
You can find a link to Alan's blog post and read more about the FAR overhaul on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The next FedGov Today podcast is coming Thursday. Generative AI use cases are exploding across government. You can learn about the common themes in those use cases if you follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. And you can listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for listening.